Hello. Thank you so much for joining us today for the MEGAMIGS Creativity track. We have a wonderful lineup of discussions for you today that will inspire you to bring creativity to life with the tools available in game development. I would like to take a moment to sincerely thank the partners who have made this event possible. Red Barrels, Stadia, Square Enix, and the City of Montreal. The Creativity track is presented by EA. Today, we will enjoy a keynote from the esteemed Leah Hoyer, the CEO and Creative Director of Level-Headed Games and the Project General Manager of Incubation at Bungie. We will also enjoy a set of mini-talks, followed by a panel featuring John Linden from Mythical Games, Chris Swan from Unit 2 Games, Neil Alfonso from Splash Damage, and Thierry Bollinger from Sabotage Studios. After this wonderful set of panels, we will have a breakout session to discuss these topics. And finally, we will be joined by Brenda Romero for a fireside chat from Romero Games. During this event, please note that you can ask questions of the presenters at any time using the Pine Chat QA tab that you'll find just to the right of this video. I will collect these questions throughout the talks and then go over them with the presenters. Now, I am pleased to welcome a creative leader that I admire greatly, Leah Hoyer. Today, Leah will be talking about setting up the foundations of productive creative environment for you and your teams.
All right. Hello, folks. Hi, I'm Leah, and it's really nice to be here. I'm glad you can join virtually. I'm actually out in Seattle, so it is 6:45 in the morning and still pitch black outside. And I will confess, I am wearing pajama pants. So I am really excited to, though, dive in with this in a comfy, creative environment and just talk to you a bit about the idea of creating creativity, because this whole track is very much about innovation and how do we think about innovative ways to really sharpen our creativity? And honestly, like, we can talk about technology and platforms and apps that people are using right now for great whiteboard solutions. If you've got a really good one, I would love to know. But I think such a core of that, though, is making sure that your organization is really set up to foster innovation and to create the kind of environment that your team is going to be thriving in and has the best chance to really hit that awesome creative stride and hit innovation. So I want to just dive into this with you. First off, as we look at innovation, I think it's really important to always think of it as creative problem solving. Like, we encounter as game devs so many problems as we're trying to get our product out the door. And then, of course, beyond that, to support it often in a live environment. And finding ways to do that, both from a product and process side, but also, of course, thinking about how innovative the actual creative content of the game is, really is about trying to find ways to reach people in new ways and coming up, therefore, with innovative solutions to that. And at the core of all of this, honestly, is, of course, the people. This is a quote that certainly around Bungie we use quite a bit, but the idea that, obviously it doesn't make sense to hire smart people and then tell them what to do, and really needing to understand that we need an environment where those people feel like they are set up to be able to tell us what to do. And I'm going to talk today about some of the things that, say, I've used in practice, some of the things I've seen amazing leaders use in practice, and that we try to incorporate day in, day out as we look to make better and better projects, at Bungie and certainly at other studios that I've worked at. Really, when it comes to setting up an amazing environment for this, like this Steve Jobs quote, so much of this comes down to leadership. And when we think about the leadership, things that I will frequently talk to people about in terms of the need for great creative leadership are really two things: that leaders need to be confident yet vulnerable. And confident is like a key part of this, because I don't know about you, but for me, anytime I can look back and think of maybe not so great work environments or not so great management situations. Very frequently, what that comes down to is some amount of insecurity on the behalf of company leadership or managers. And a lot of that is when leaders feel insecure about what they're doing, that will almost always show to their team and show in ways that really hamper their creativity. And in many ways, like, confidence comes around, you can think of it as, not feeling like you have imposter syndrome, or it can feel like you as a leader are set up for success in various other ways. But you need to have the confidence to allow the team to be able to explore and to be able to come to you with problems and to not over control the process, as it were. And really with that, it's actually not a completely separate idea, but the vulnerability is something that can only happen with a leader when they are indeed truly confident. If you think about the fact that, it's also, I would say, some people, when we talk about these two principles at Bungie and when I have discussions with other folks, sometimes people think of this as just being open, say, to other ideas or being flexible. And I think vulnerability is a much stronger word than that. It is the ability to kind of share your personal weaknesses and to know that, hey, I am confident enough to be able to say, I don't have all the answers to this, and that's okay. I think that is such the core of a lot of people's sense of, like an imposter syndrome, or hey, I work with a team that is so amazingly awesome. Most people kind of early in career feel like it's their job to kind of, as a manager or as a leader, be better and know more than the other people on their team. And I think as we all mature, one thing that's so important to realize is that is not anyone's job. And I think with that then comes the ability to ask your team for help and to be aware of when you've made mistakes and push that forward. And that kind of leadership truly allows for the foundation of a great creative environment. So this is like, if you take nothing else away from this, I'd love for you to think about your organization, maybe you as a leader and other people there, of how do you instill in that leadership enough sense of confidence and support for them that they can do so with their teams. This is also a truism that we use at Bungie. We have various kind of tenets of working there. And the idea that teams are stronger than heroes for us is so incredibly important. And this really backs up that sense of, confident yet vulnerable leadership. Again, it's not about any one person, and letting the team know that they are in a place where you're going to support them, or they are supporting each other, and letting the team do its best work. And in some ways, hiring the right people, giving them really clear guidelines for success, and then getting out of their way is such a critical part of, core leadership. And it's something that, I think we talk about a lot. It's not like any of these ideas are probably brand new to you, but in terms of thinking about setting up awesome creative space, this is the single thing that will generally torpedo that the most. And so making sure that you're taking the time with your team to think about this is so core. Now I want to sort of shift to kind of innovation development. And truth of this is people development. And how do you think about developing people to make them better innovators, to allow for their creativity to shine? And I personally subscribe to the idea that creativity, like so many other human traits, really comes on a bell curve. Some people have just a huge amount of innate creativity, and that other folks may have a lot of it, but there is really key elements of, say, a person like say Steve Jobs. We all would look at an entity like that and say, you know what, this was a real innovator who also was a confident, vulnerable leader, who got out of the way of his team. And what that allowed to do was a sense that while he may be at the very far end of this kind of innovation and creativity bell curve, he took advantage of the fact that he knew that he might have a teammate that can increase their creativity, that creativity can be honed, and also that creativity really loves company. So more people being creative together actually can create someone who can create an entity that replicates the kind of innovation that those like model innovators that we all admire can be. And this is something that, again, I think is so important to be thinking about, like, how do we hone that creativity and how do we get creative people working together in such a way that they force multiply each other for innovation. One really key thing to think about putting into your day-to-day work environment is that people absolutely become more creative when they are pushed beyond their area of expertise. And this comes up so often in the games industry because we have so many people in different disciplines. And it's great that your level designer might be one of the best level designers you have ever worked with. But giving them a chance to step out of level design and maybe try something like, hey, I'm going to spend a day with audio thinking about what is the right, sound effects to be putting into this level to make sure that that feels extra special, or allowing some of the audio people to come over and do some brainstorming in the design space. That might, of course, just bring great ideas to that individual project and that feature that might be worked on at the moment. But what it also does is really opens up the brains of people who, if all I get to do when I come to work is think about level design, for 40 or 50 hours a week, I'm going to start to be cemented in the ways that I do things. I'm going to fall back on routines. Whereas if I'm given the opportunity to be part of, say, a small team brainstorming on a feature that's outside of my area of expertise, my brain is going to crack open in some ways and start to think about things differently. And those are the moments when you start to see true innovation happening and you start to see the creativity really be able to spark again. And that moment, they're even going to bring that back. They may, like this level designer might offer something to the audio team as this, taking this example, that gives the audio team great ideas for something they can innovate on. But all of a sudden, since that level designer has been able to think differently about their job, they may come back and see their work with fresh eyes. So I would really encourage folks to give their teams and their people opportunities to break out of their routine, because that is, again, the sort of thing that allows for new neuron pathways to form and new kind of creativity to happen. With this, the idea that, giving other opportunities to think outside their discipline and having them figure out ways to discover ways they can contribute. One other example that I actually invoked back when I worked at Xbox, and I was leading up a narrative design team there. And we actually had several issues as a narrative design team. One, because it was a central services org, there were a lot of people who really didn't know exactly what we did, to be honest. The games industry, is getting a heck of a lot better at it, but not every studio has a huge appreciation for what narrative design means. So we as a team actually got together and said, how do we help solve that problem? It's not even about us getting better as narrative designers, but how can we, within this large org, sort of help people understand what it is that we do and how do we bring these things to the team? And the team itself came up with this idea of doing game club. Its tagline is, it's like book club, but better. And really what we did is invite people from all sorts of disciplines to play different, generally indie games, things that had sort of a story forward focus to them. And so folks might spend a couple weeks playing through this, and then we'd invite them all to get into a room. And these started to become really popular. We actually had to get bigger and bigger rooms to accommodate people who wanted to discuss it, and then wound up breaking people off so discussions weren't so overwhelming, and wound up building up to maybe 75 or so people who wanted to be part of this, and broke up into, say, 5 rooms of 15. And what was really core is then, we just start talking to people about what they appreciated about the story, what they enjoyed, what they didn't like about the story, where things worked for them, where it didn't, and then start to crack open why, and give them a chance to really lead the discussion, because they were the people who were consuming this story, so they were the experts. And then it was possible for, in the discussion, the narrative designers to talk further about some of the strategies that might have been used, and some of the thought process and craft that went into making that, and some of the decisions, that maybe they agreed with, some of them that maybe they didn't. Really, they started to be just really fun, robust discussions. And we found on the outside that other people then started coming up with more ways in which story could be better integrated into their games. And this is just another example of giving people an opportunity to dive a little deeper into something that's outside their area, that gives them chances on the front line when that narrative designer might not even be in the room, to be an advocate for that, which created a great space to make innovative narrative design within the games that we were working on. All right, now I want to move over and sort of the big final thing that I want to make sure to cover, though, is this supportive culture. And we talked at the beginning of how the fact that, of course, as part of this, the leadership sets the tone, and the leadership is the group of people that need to be accountable for making sure that the people are supported, of course, in their way and their desire to be more creative, and in the company's desire to find the innovation in all of these projects. But the leadership, aside from their demeanor and setting the right kind of tone for action, also is really responsible for setting up a supportive culture, because, and this is another quote that we bandy around a ton as we're looking, and particularly because I'm in incubation, we know that there are steps with any game, as you're looking at those early ideation phases, where you're going to put things out there and you wholeheartedly believe in it, and you realize, that thing just didn't quite land. You start to test it, you put it together, you realize you might not have the technology to support it yet, you might not have the people resources to really hit that bar, and you go, you know what, that we tried that, but that feature is just not going to work for us, or this way of going about this feature is not going to work for us. And on some levels, of course, those are failures, but it is so incredibly critical that you set up an environment that allows for failure, because it's I love this quote, it's not a necessary evil, it's a necessary consequence of doing new things. And so therefore, what's really critical is that your company has a safety net. Your team culture is set up to be a safety net for ideation, for trying new things, for taking risks, so that people, of course, feel like they can put themselves out there, they can try something new and not suffer any unwanted repercussions down the road. That is, of course, not to say that, you don't have to manage people to success, and that all mistakes always are going to be okay and an okay part of your process. But in the ideation phase, and as you are coming up with those early development of what should this feature be, how should we integrate these, there really has to be a huge safe space for people to try things, pose ideas, brainstorm with one another, yes, and each other, so that they know that the thing that just came out of their mouth might have been really dumb, but it might have sparked something else for someone else. And so they are protected and feeling like they could say it. So when talking about creating a true safety net, here are some things that I think I and my teams have found that really are important to making that happen. One gets back to that idea of vulnerable leadership. Leadership that gets out there and can admit their own mistakes, actually puts those out front. I would say one of the best managers I have ever had, and it's something I try to recreate, sort of when working with new teammates, actually as people go around the room, including them, it starts with them and shares like one of the things that they think is one of the biggest professional mistakes they've ever made. It could be a detail about creative and some feature that they swore was going to win and it just totally lost, or whether it was about interpersonal communication, whether it was about mismanaging politics, like all those kind of things. But being able to just lay it out there and be like, hey, I as a leader am not perfect. I've done some things and I want to always learn from them. I want you to feel like you can call me out when you're feeling like you're not safe. And I want you to feel safe when you are trying something risky. And with that, making sure to set up, of course, clear expectations and success criteria. And I think the critical thing to remember about this is it's not just for individuals and for teams, but what are the expectations and success criteria for management? And I think teams so rarely see that. That there is oftentimes, and when you start to get maybe disgruntled employees or ones that turtle and don't want to be part of the conversation and therefore are not giving their best work creatively. Oftentimes it's because they're disgruntled that they feel like management isn't being held accountable to things. I think we can all probably think back of moments in our career where that has been the case. And one fairly easy thing that management can do to make sure that that's happening, that the company leadership or team leadership can do, is make sure that the team also understands what they're on the hook for and is seeing them making progress towards that. And certainly, if there are cases where there are leaders within a team or company that aren't living up to their expectations, they are seeing, in fact, some push to make change in that area, some amount of repercussion. And again, it doesn't have to be, oh, they're being punished or they're instantly being fired. Like, again, we want to create a safe environment, but they have to see that their leaders are being held accountable as well. Then you want to make sure that there are in place established methods to analyze and learn from failures. And this is a space like a constant theme that I'm always working with in creating a safe space for innovation is how do you look back at that last section we were talking about? How do you involve the team in thinking about some of these methods that we can use to analyze or learn from failures? How do we want to review these as a group? Who should be reviewing them? Can we pull in people who might be different voices than would normally be in the room when we're talking about this kind of feature? So these methods and the ways you go about analyzing kind of the progress of your team really are things that in many ways I've seen the most success when you turn over the creation of those methods to the team itself and allow them to be invested in it. And that's something I would, encourage teams to think about doing, to go back to their, the folks that they work with and say, hey, we've got this milestone coming up. What do we think we want to do to kind of evaluate how we did? Are there other voices we'd love to bring into the room? How would we want to, maybe play test this differently? Or how would we want to think about just doing a good survey of what worked and what didn't, and giving your team the ability to not just give input, but talk about how they can give input. And then this is really key. You know what? Creativity, like innovation, isn't the goal of any product throughout its entire life cycle. You sort of have those early phases of, game development where what you are most concerned about is how do we make something about our product new and special so that people are going to love it and want to play it and it stands out in a crowded marketplace. And we think about innovating our processes so that our tools are easier for our developers to use. All of those things, like there is a core innovation phase when making new games. But that innovation, the need for innovation, even the desire for innovation, a lot of times will and should taper off throughout that process because teams, of course, need kind of to understand that there is a plan and that there's not going to be constant churn across the board. Like, we have now a really good plan that we put a lot of creativity and innovation into. Now we need to trust that that's there and we're going to move forward with it. Yes, are we going to revise things along the way? Sure. But the security that comes with the idea that we're all headed in a general direction and we'll make adjustments as needed, but it's not going to have a major shift because some idea has come out there. And while this probably deserves its own slide, I will say a frequent mantra that we use is like, your second or third idea, like best idea that really has good time to be executed upon, is going to be vastly better in the end than that brand new awesome idea that came along too late to really see the benefits of. And so, at some point, the innovation focus has to turn off, and it's got to be clear to a team when that's the case. Because at that point, then the rules and expectations for people on your team change. And that's a good thing. Like, making sure that that's clear, it sort of comes back up to the clear expectations bullet. And with that, if you're able to do that, you just establish a culture of trust. And trust is like, honestly, the number one factor for all devs I think I've ever met, is that they can trust their company to have their back. They can trust their company to allow them to explore their creativity. They, can trust that the direction that has been set through that process of innovation is then something that they can generally rely upon as they're moving forward, because we know that the things we do are absolutely full of risks. But the big idea here is that the environment that we do them in should not be. And with that, I would love to turn it over to any questions.
Wonderful. That was a really great presentation. I certainly enjoyed it. It's great to hear about how to support creativity and innovation in an environment like game development, where we have so much technology that we have to work with. So I do have a few questions from our audience. The first one is, you said, admit when you're making mistakes, push that forward. Mm-hmm. How would you handle individuals in lead roles who avoid the idea of admitting their own mistakes?
Well, I think, honestly, a lot of that can come from...
So are we going to have to unmute ourselves in Discord
them
when we
sometimes
go live?
Feeling insecure. And I think it is always the mark of a really good leader to also think about these leaders. They might be a lead on a team, but you might be the director of a project, for instance. Having also open and vulnerable conversations yourself with them about, just asking, is there something I can be doing more to make sure that their role feels safe, that they feel secure? Because again, it starts from the top, and at every level that support has to be passed along. And so I would start there. I would very much start there and explain certainly why there's that need, but also dig a little deeper and find out, is there something you could be doing to support them so that they feel more secure? Because like, oftentimes when they're not vulnerable, or there's maybe a certain amount of, say, micromanagement, or yes, I've allowed the team to go its own way for a while, but it's not working the way that I want it to, so I've got to take it back. As I think we've all probably seen that happen in the games industry. That can frequently come from a sense that, wow, if I let this stay out of completely out of my hands, then I'm going to be on the hook for something that this team has done. And so again, getting that level of trust with their manager, but then also talking about, I think, finding that right balance, because there's certainly, like, trusting your team does not ever mean that you're not giving them feedback. It's just also looking at your feedback culture and looking at the ways in which that person may be giving feedback, because all too frequently what may happen is a person says, okay, I'm not sure I like X about this, or you might try to make more Y in this game, and then it doesn't happen instantly, and then it goes from I've given feedback to now I've got to take it away. And there's a lot of middle ground there, and thinking about developing new ways for more open communication and better feedback is just the place that you also really need to spend some time people management's hard, right? Like people are complicated. And so how do we, it takes time and it takes patience, and it just, again, trust isn't just something that instantly happens. It's built up over time, and seeing those actions repeated over and over again. And sometimes it might take your team, a while. It might take some of your mid-level leaders a while to also buy into that. And honestly, that's just a part of building an awesome team and getting that culture of trust there and doing it time and time again, because it takes a while to build it. It's really fast. It's really easy to break it, right? So anyway, all right.
Well, so that leads well into this next question. If you are just an employee, are there any ways to encourage the company you're working at to be more creative, to take more risks, to break their routine and innovate?
Yeah, I mean, I would hope so. So that is the, I don't know anybody's individual, like the person who asked this question, I certainly don't know your individual situation, but I would suspect that you have leaders at your company who you feel like you do have that trust bond with. And ideally, there are moments in the kind of rhythm of the business when
I don't know
they
if this
do
is
look
supposed
for
to happen,
people
but I'm being told that they can already hear me in the
certainly
MEGS
start by taking advantage
conference.
of any of those moments, the
So,
kind
hi,
of
MEGS.
sharing of ideas and ideation. But being able to go to a couple leaders who you see as allies and really talking about, even if it's about this, like if you're like, hey, I was just at MEGS, hey, you guys paid for me to go to that thing. Here's something I've learned. If you can come back and say, there was a reason that the company covered my cost on this, or I felt it was important enough for me to learn to go and pay for this on my own. And here's something I'd learned that I'd love to bring back. I mean, if you can use this as a catalyst, awesome. That's like my dream, is that, this is something that can it can spark change. Talk to those ally leaders and just say, hey, I feel like there's more things we can be doing to get more diverse ideas, not just of what we're making, but in how we're making it. And it would be really cool for us to take some time to think about that, to think about the ways that we brainstorm at the beginning, to think about the ways that we review along, a milestone cadence, to think about the ways that we get our ideas in front of different voices and different audiences within the company. And I would, reach out to those people. And, I suspect, like, if they are a really good leader who you trust, I suspect they're going to be pretty open to hearing about some of these things.
Absolutely. So speaking of those methods to support creativity, and you noted this before, right now we are facing particular challenges due to the COVID-19 pandemic and many people not being able to work at their studios in person where a lot of creativity conversation usually happens. Do you have any recommendations for maintaining an innovative and creative environment while working from home?
Yeah, I will say, I think we're all, struggling with this to some extent. And, working with a team right now that is in that kind of pre-production ideation phase, we're, designing features, and we're talking about our audience and, what they would want to do, but not being able to play test with them and those sorts of things. Like, we had an unfortunate thing where we had a play test entirely lined up with a prototype we had made, and we shut the studio down the day before it was supposed to start. Like, we were this close to being able to get that feedback. And, we still sit there and go, oh, okay, but how can we, how would we be able to do that? And we, we're starting to open up the possibilities to do more sort of friends and family. And while it's always going to have a bit more of a skew to it, there are more ways that we're thinking about doing that. For instance, it's just a way to solve that one particular problem. But I know from personal experience and pain points that particularly that brainstorming side of things there's just something that we all feel like we lose when we're not in a room together. And so I think, brainstorms without the kind of micro expressions and the ability to just kind of read a room. And everybody just would so desperately love to be in one room with a giant whiteboard, and everyone has their own, pen that they could go up and squiggle and do things and be shoving sticky notes on stuff. And we're trying to, I mean, I wasn't kidding. We are reviewing a lot of whiteboard programs, trying to find one that we think is helps us get there, because I'd say early on in this, we were at best getting 75 to 80% of the kind of creativity and the output that you would get from a brainstorm meeting. I'd say we're probably now at close to 90%, but man, that last 10% is important, and we all know it. So other things that happen is there are times when I, as like a team leader, will just set up it's kind of an office hours basically, but it's sort of desk time, because that's one of the things that I think we frequently miss, is the ability to just look over someone's shoulder, or you have this conversation going on over here and other people are having something. One of the teams at Bungie I know it's a slightly smaller team than the one that I'm on. So I think it's maybe a little more doable, but for a team that say in the 5 to 7 or 8 people, they just actually keep their Discord voice stuff on all the time. Like when they're not in a meeting, like they'll sign out of it if they have to go to a specific Zoom call. But it really helps them kind of have that environment of that open office. We're having conversations. Some of it's about my dog and some of it's about a feature, and that keeps the camaraderie and the morale high, because that's, goodness, whole other topic of, how do you help your team feel positive and feel just supported as humans during all of this. But it also, you then start to hear two people, sharing a screen and talking about something that they're working on. And that's the opportunity to then have someone else in the room be like, oh, hey, no, that's interesting. It kind of gives me an idea. Is there a way that we could weave some of those concepts into this other feature, the stuff that just happened when we were all in a room together? And so that, I know they've found that to be really, really useful. And you may consider that doing with, say, a smaller team. And again, like I just have some time that I'm just there and I'm in we use Teams, but basically a Teams or Zoom room for a while and doing my work. And if people want to show up and just talk and ask questions, and sometimes it's non-work related and sometimes it's totally work related, just like it would be in an office. Like there's nothing wrong with getting one of these. We have happy hours. We, just get together and, people can bring their water or their whiskey. It depends on how that week went, and we have that discussion. And we also play games together as a team. And some of that is about, oh, you know what, this one is doing something similar to something we want to do. So let's get in and let's learn about it. But honestly, the bulk of that is just the camaraderie and conversation. And then 20% of it is like, oh, that's really interesting. Do you see what they did with that controller scheme? Or do you see what they did with the lighting over there to highlight something? We should think about that. Okay, now let's go back to talking about my dog. And so, I'd encourage all of those. And I think, I would love to also get people's other, like if you found something, sharing it in the chat or whatever that works for you would be great, because this is a space where none of us were prepared to have the answers for it. And we're going to have, it also seems, unfortunately, especially in the US, that this isn't, it's not like it's going away by the end of the year. 2020 doesn't magically mark then, and then COVID's gone. We have to, we'll be dealing with this for a bit. Bungie's basically said that we know we're not going to start opening the studio back up until this coming summer. A lot of other companies have said the same. And this has really opened up the space for more work from home possibilities. So needing to solve these for the long term, that's a great thing for the games industry, to be able to have the flexibility for more work from home options in terms of recruiting and team composition long term. But it means we have to really get in and solve a lot of these. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So you were just talking about the importance of maintaining team morale, particularly while working from home. How do you maintain individual morale when encouraging failure? Many companies use yearly evaluations or bi-yearly evaluations. So how do you make people feel okay emotionally with having failures and embracing failures, not just through systems?
I think the big thing, and I know we have to wrap, so I'll keep this kind of short, but the big thing is, those like semi-annual and annual reviews are obviously key. But I think those always need to be approached with a very much a growth mindset on both sides. Like, how are we actually looking at moving you forward, not punishing you for the stuff you've done in the past? Like, when there are things that maybe, there has been, if there has been, like, say, a repeat pattern of, oh, we tried this thing and it didn't work, and tried this thing and it didn't work, or we tried the same thing again and expected a different result and it didn't work, or some of those, like, those are really important to make sure that you're calling out those things in the moment, and you're not waiting for the 6-month or annual review, because those should never be a surprise, and it's going to be much more powerful feedback when you're there and you can be talking about, hey, as a team together, how do we take this thing, learn from it, but also let's come up with ideas for how we can do this better next time, and make that an ongoing part of the process, so that ideally what those bigger reviews are is like, sure, a couple of those may be as bullets, but it's now like, okay, how do we take some of the things we learned to think about where you want to be this time next year, or this time 6 months from now. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful to hear you talk about this. I'm feeling more creative, inspired just from these last discussions. For everyone else, we're now going to a 5-minute break. So stay tuned, but feel free to go grab a fresh coffee or water, and we'll see you back soon for our panels.
Bye all. Thanks so much.